Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
You know, there's something about being deep in a river swamp at night. The sounds, the shadows, makes you wonder what might be out there, lurking, watching, makes you wonder. Hi, I'm Doug Phillips. Come along for an adventure into the hidden haunts of a place that does indeed evoke wonder. But more than wondering what's lurking out here, this place happens to be one of Alabama's remarkable natural wonders. Come along for a visit to the Sipsey River Swamp. What was that? Boy, it's spooky out here.
This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has escaped the hustle and bustle of modern civilization, a place with bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the natural wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama.
Welcome to Discovering Alabama. If you think me and old Turkey here are trustworthy sorts, well, we've got some swampland to sell you. But actually, this stretch of the Sipsey Swamp really isn't for sale. It's part of several thousand acres of the Sipsey recently purchased by the Alabama Forever Wild program to be set aside as a permanent natural area. Now, why would anybody want to spend good money on old swampland? Let's take a trip down the Sipsey to explore its natural wonder and learn why protecting such swampland is important. Of course, a first clue to this importance is obvious. Forever Wild interest in the Sipsey helps dispel that old myth that swampland is worthless. The word swamp has a bit of a bad rap, often conjuring up images of scary creatures rising up from the murky waters. But in the light of day, a swamp is not nearly so spooky. In fact, if you give it a chance, you'll see it's really quite beautiful. Another misconception about the Sipsey Swamp has to do with its name. It's sometimes confused with the Sipsey Wilderness Area, which is an entirely different feature in another part of the state. The Sipsey River is about 100 miles long and is formed where several smaller streams come together in northern Fayette County. From there, it flows through Tuscaloosa, Pickens, and Greene counties before emptying into the Tombigbee River. For most of its length, it's a lowland river, winding its way south through the broadening Sipsey Valley. Its waters frequently overflow the stream banks and spread out over the surrounding lowlands. This flooding deposits water and organic debris into the lowlands, creating the Sipsey River Swamp. Containing over 50,000 acres, the Sipsey River Swamp is one of the state's largest wetlands. The frequent overflowing of the Sipsey River and the creation of the swamp produces rich, fertile habitat for an abundance of life. Drifting quietly down the Sipsey River puts us right in the middle of the swamp. Yet there's much to discover beyond the reach of the canoe.
Here in early autumn, before seasonal rains have swelled the river, we can get out and get a close-up look of the different levels that make up a swamp. Come on.
The Sipsey got its name from the giant trees that once filled its bottomlands. Sipsey is a Native American word believed to refer to the cottonwood tree. At one time, there were thick groves of these majestic trees as far as the eye could see along the swamp. Some believe the Sipsey was a traditional boundary between Indian tribes. It's more likely the area was dominated by the Choctaws, who would have fished and hunted the bounty of the Sipsey River and swamp. The abundance of wildlife in the area attracted market hunters and commercial fishermen during the late 1800s. And by the early 20th century, harvesting of the bottomland forest of the swamp opened up this fertile land to farming.
That's right, out here I'm standing in a fertile pasture on the outer reaches of the swamp. Those cows grazing lazily over there don't exactly look like swamp creatures, but in this case at least, they are swamp inhabitants.
The cleared lands of the Sipsey Valley are as fertile for row crops as they are for pasture. Cotton, corn, peanuts, and sweet potatoes are among the crops that have been raised in the outer reaches of the Sipsey.
While the outer regions may flood every several years, as we move closer to the river, here we find an area that probably floods annually here in this hardwood river bottom. Here we find species such as water oak, swamp white oak, swamp chestnut oak, maple, hickory, a number of nut and seed-bearing species that are good for the wild critters that live out here.
Back at water's edge, there's another zone of life, much of it unique to the swamp.
Here near the banks of the river, you can see the high water mark on these tupelo. Hard to believe a stream as tranquil as this one is today can reach such heights. You can just imagine what it's like when the water's really up. The varied aspects of a swamp create all kinds of habitat for all kinds of critters. Right over here, for example, we see the old homestead for a family of beavers. An expedition into the Sipsey Swamp puts you right in the middle of swamp critter country. Contrary to popular myth, the wild creatures of the swamp pose little threat to us humans. Even the snakes will probably leave us alone if we leave them alone. All of these wild features, the woods, the marsh, the animals, all of these are part of what we might call the natural values of the Sipsey Swamp. Of course, sometimes out here things get really wild.
Okay, Jordan, what do you want to tell me?
The remarkable natural values of the Sipsey make this a place of special educational value.
The kids are in the swamp just to experience firsthand what we've been talking about in the classroom. And I keep hearing a lot about computers in the classroom, and I'm all for that. But what I'm seeing now is that children need more adult peer interaction, and they do need to come out and experience things firsthand. It's the hands-on, the being out there. It just makes it come alive, makes it relevant. The kids want to learn about it if they've experienced it firsthand.
Scientists, too, find the Sipsey River Swamp to be a living laboratory.
For many years I've been involved in a program which is very active here at the University of Alabama, and it essentially asks the question, why do we have this enormous diversity of organisms, and why are they so productive as they are?
The organisms that live in the floodplain are adapted to these natural floods. The trees, the mosses that you see on the trees around here, and back up on the floodplain you have a lot of invertebrate animals as well. The aquatic insects, small crustaceans, small shrimp, all kinds of invertebrates that occur in the floodplain as well as in the channel, and there are different kinds of species. And this is a particularly good snag, as it's called, the submerged wood that we pulled up, and it's just covered with all kinds of structures built by aquatic insects. This wood stays in the river for a very long time. It doesn't decompose very fast, and it's really an important structural feature of this system in that it not only helps stabilize the banks, but it also is the home for most of the biological diversity in the river.
We're doing a survey of the mussels of the Sipsey, and today we found about 15 species of mussels. Included in this group is the giant washboard. The Sipsey is good for this species because it's it's in an unaltered state. It's had very little in the way of pollution entering the system. It's still a fairly natural ecosystem in that the gravel bars, the meanders have not been impacted in recent years. There's still a good bit of current flow, meandering channel, and silt-free gravel bars that are necessary for this species.
The Sipsey River Swamp is also a great place for an up-close experience with history. This old sawed-off cypress stump, for example, is a monument to early 20th century history in Alabama.
Well, a lot of logging was done here when I was a little bitty boy. It used to be a railroad. We called it Old Dummy Line, went down through here. It went to Sipsey Valley Lumber Company's mill, about a mile up the road. And they'd haul them out of here with the train, them logs. And they'd haul the logs from out of the swamp to the old railroad on wagons, mules and horses. My daddy had horses and mules, haul logs when I was a little old bitty boy. I wasn't big enough to work. I was big enough to carry them to lunch at 12 o'clock.
They had road beds fixed for trains, and what they didn't have, they'd have horses pulling them out. Some of these trees, some of these cypresses, you know, would be so big, they only could put one on a wagon, you know, pulling it out, you know. They'd be so that big, you know. And in the pines, there'd be like only two they could get on a wagon, you know, get them out from down in here.
50 years ago, I was coming to the Sipsey Swamp with my parents in a wagon with corn in the back to feed the team, and we would stay, that was our spring and fall vacation. We would put out set hooks, and before I was 7 years old, we would go up and down the riverbank and see how many different kind of plants we could find, how many blossoms we could find, and the variety of plants in this area, you just can't count them.
One of the things we were talking about when we were studying wetlands was the shape of the trees. What do you notice that's a bit unusual about this tree?
There's water at the bottom.
Why do you think it might be water at the bottom in a wetland area?
So it can hold the tree.
In addition to the educational and scientific values of the Sipsey River and Swamp, the area holds unique recreational values that all Alabamians can relate to. Yet there is another value that we are just beginning to fully recognize.
The values of wetlands are manifold. In particular, they function as what I call a kidney of the landscape. That is, they function very effectively in the removal of nutrients and pollutants from water that flows off of the land and eventually intersects with either a lake or a stream.
The cleansing role of wetlands was largely overlooked until relatively recently. Wetlands, swamps in particular, were seen as a nuisance, something to be dredged or filled. Fortunately, the natural wonder of the Sipsey remains and continues to serve as kidneys for the landscape.
We were really interested in seeing this area preserved. It's a beautiful area, it's a beautiful wild area. It protects our water system, and we want to be sure that what the beautiful part of it and the important part of it is left natural and wild.
The Sipsey Swamp is one of few places where we can still find ancient cypress, like this old fellow, which is several hundred years old and somehow escaped the logging of earlier times. Still, logging, agriculture, and those practices we often refer to as progress have exacted a toll on this Alabama natural wonder.
Attaboy.
Though the Sipsey landscape has been altered by the human hand, it's still a free-flowing river, and you only have to look a little ways east at the Black Warrior River to see just how dramatic the human hand can be to a stream.
Free-flowing simply means the river has not been dammed. The nearby Black Warrior River was dammed for navigational purposes in the late 1800s. Interestingly, a government study from around the same period suggested that the Sipsey River not be dammed. Lucky for you and me here in the swamp today. In recent years, a great deal of scientific study has been done to evaluate the effects of such damming on what were once free-flowing rivers.
When river systems such as the Sipsey River or other systems are dammed, then you increase the water level artificially and essentially inundate areas and eliminate a very large group of plants, both of trees that tolerate some degree of saturated hydrosoils, or true aquatic plants, and these are just cannot tolerate that type of inundation.
A few years ago I did a study on rivers, on free-flowing rivers in the entire United States, specifically the contiguous 48 states, and found that the Sipsey was just one of 42 rivers in the entire country that was at least 200 kilometers in length, and that's not a really very big river, but at least that long and reasonably natural and free-flowing.
Despite human influence, this free-flowing river remains testimony to what once was. And because of a new kind of human influence, the Sipsey gives testimony to what can still be.
In 1999, Alabama's Forever Wild program concluded purchase of a sizable tract of the Sipsey River Swamp as a legacy for all the people of Alabama.
Forever Wild is securing unique habitats for rare plants and animals, unique communities as nature preserves. It's buying recreation areas to provide activities that have fallen through the net among other acquisition programs.
This is one of the best programs to just continue to let nature take its course. This 3,000 acres is more than a gift for us. It's a gift for the future.
The natural appeal of the Sipsey River Swamp is so uncommonly special that it has been officially selected as one of Alabama's top natural wonders by the Alabama Natural Wonders Program.
I gotta tell you, we're very proud of our Natural Wonders campaign. The Natural Wonders campaign was started around 2 years ago with the idea of designating over 10 areas across the state as natural wonders.
The Alabama Natural Wonders campaign promotes natural areas of special beauty and ecological significance throughout the state.
Natural Wonders started out a few years ago. We brought together a lot of the local groups, Tuscaloosa, Audubon, West Alabama Sierra, our local chapter, and we worked to do a big education event called a Natural Wonder Dedication, brought in our elected officials, made them aware of the swamp's values, took a tour.
The Forever Wild purchase of this tract of the Sipsey Swamp, along with its designation as an official Alabama Natural Wonder, makes it possible for many more Alabamians to get an up-close look at the values of the swamp.
There's a lot of isolated pools in these slough areas, and in those pools you get a lot of wildlife that get trapped in there. fish, crayfish, tadpoles, things like that. Those are real opportunistic situations for birds and other wildlife to come in and feed on those trapped critters. This feather, I picked this up on the road yesterday when I came in here. This is a turkey's feather. And that's another one of the birds that are quite common on this property.
Oh, now this is one of the prizes of the southern swamps right here. This is the southern painted turtle. This beautiful psychedelic pattern on his belly. And then the southern one has this nice racing stripe right down the middle of his shell here.
This is a smallmouth buffalo. It's a member of the sucker family. This is a particularly unique species because commercial fishermen caught this fish in the late 1800s, 100, 200, 300,000 pounds.
This switch cane behind me is a unique wetlands type plant, and we'll find that throughout the swamp area. Here we have a false foxglove as opposed to the true foxgloves, which digitalis heart medicine is made from. The Heritage Section is responsible for doing inventory work of all the Forever Wild properties, and this spring we're going to go out and inventory for plants and animals, and we'll get a general idea of the different species of plants we have here growing in this beautiful area.
I'm glad that Forever Wild got it, and it could be preserved for the future generation. But you take a lot of people that doesn't know the country, never raised in the country, and they come out here and they see an area where it's real beautiful, like it is right in here, see, you know. And you see a squirrel, you see a deer, you know, and that's the whole point of it right there.
The Forever Wild purchase of Sipsey lands will protect about 3,000 acres of this special wonder. But protection for the overall Sipsey will require some special cooperation.
3,000 acres is a lot, yet it's only about 6% of the total acreage of the swamp. Even when we include several hundred acres owned by the Alabama Department of Transportation, public ownership of Sipsey swampland is limited. The future of the Sipsey River Swamp also requires the efforts of private landowners.
I think that all the landowners need to realize the significance of the area and the importance of it to the community, that we want to maintain the water quality ultimately. You know, besides water quality and wildlife diversity, aesthetics I think is an important component of the values that we have down there. And on the Sipsey, we consider that kind of a special place, and we'll have usually a very wide streamside management zone where we leave timber so that the people canoeing or using the Sipsey have a better experience.
Educational values, scientific values, cleansing values, recreational values, natural values. The many values of the Sipsey River Swamp are intertwined, inseparable from one another. So too, the various components of nature that make up the swamp are intertwined.
The Sipsey River and swamp can be understood as a system that functions best when its parts are pretty much intact. We're coming to realize that the Sipsey is a unique corridor of nature.
We tend to think of rivers being protected by the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Well, that's fine as far as it goes, but most of the time it does not protect the floodplain that surrounds rivers like this. It may protect only a very short segment of those rivers. And what you really need to do if you're going to protect a river that's free-flowing like this is protect it from its headwaters to as far downstream as you can go.
Think about protecting the whole basin. Take a look at the acreage that Florida has protected in the Everglades. Take a look at the acreage that Georgia has protected in the Okefenokee. Take a look at state after state and think that way. Think about protecting the whole basin.
The challenge and excitement that one can only experience in the out-of-doors is becoming increasingly difficult to find throughout much of the country. Indeed, even in our own state, increasing population and development are encroaching on the natural heritage many of us hold so dear. In an effort to preserve our remaining wildlands and wetlands, many folks are trying to put dollar values on the services provided by nature. Perhaps we can put a dollar value on the tourism attraction of Alabama's wild areas. There are dollar figures for the economic value of hunting and fishing in the state. And today we're beginning to also understand there's a quantifiable price for clean water and clean air. But ultimately, we must recognize the inherent, irreplaceable natural values of our remaining wild places, like the Sipsey River Swamp.
Well, I understand the significance of the wetlands and how important it is for cleaning the water and for animals, but it's just a thing of beauty, and it just quiets my nerves.
So the next time somebody offers to sell you some old swampland, it just might be the value of that old swampland is pretty great indeed.
This program is supported by grants from the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Alabama Wildlife Federation, and Legacy, Partners in Environmental Education.